Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and joining me today is another guest that I met at this year's AnaCon, as well as the AnaCon before. Now, my guest today is the co-creator and author of the all-ages comedy adventure graphic novel series, Monster Elementary. The first book in the series, Monster Elementary, won the Independent Publishers Book Award's Gold Medal for Best Humor Graphic Novel in 2015. He has made his professional comics debut as the first ever user-submitted content winner for DC Zuda Comics and artist Daniele Serra for their webcomic, Pray for Death, in 2007. He has also collaborated with artist Josh Gowdy for their short comic Lost Boys in the Drawmore Inc anthology, NOBODIES Volume 2. Besides his comic work, he is the author of 3 children's books for Fat Rabbit Farm, an accomplished playwright and card-carrying member of the Dramatists Guild, a California native. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts in Theater Arts from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and resides in Los Angeles. And if you remember an episode not too long ago, I want to say last year, you remember I also highlighted this comic, The Kid and the Ripper, which is a very great graphic novel. So without further ado, viewers and listeners, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, author and all-around amazing creator, Nicholas Doan. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome, Nicholas. Awesome. So before we dive into your work, is there anything else you'd like to add about your background? I know you've done a lot and you're part of a lot of incredible things.
Yeah. I broke in with Pray for Death, and that was part of DC Comics, which was kind of awesome. I learned to write as a playwright at UC Santa Cruz, and have produced a couple of small productions. So that's awesome. Also, I did background work in Star Trek. So that was fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's incredible, Nicholas. That's incredible. Now, you've written a lot for not just yourself, but also for other companies, for other press houses. And probably the ones I keep seeing a lot when I search up your name is, of course, Monster Elementary and, of course, The Ripper and the Kid. Now, as a brief teaser, because I don't want to spoil those incredible series, what can you tell us as a little window into Monster Elementary and The Kid and the Ripper?
Monster Elementary is kind of was my way to have a lot of fun. And it's about these 5 monster kids that go to an all-monster private school, and it's shut down by the FBI. So now they have to go to a human public school and try to fit in and get along with the normies. But then The Kid and the Ripper, like, that's my baby. That I sat on that story for a good 14 years because I didn't want to do it without the right artist. So it's a lot of my own love into that book.
Awesome.
It's about Billy the Kid and Jack the Ripper, and they've both faked their deaths and moved out farther west to try and start over. But of course, when you put history's 2 greatest killers in the same small California mining town, things are going to get interesting.
And they do, viewers and listeners, and they do. Again, I don't want to spoil it too much, but the story is incredible. The artwork is amazing. And because these are 2 of history's most notorious killers, be prepared for a lot of graphic violence. And that's all I'm going to say for The Kid and the Ripper. So before we dive deep into some of your works, Nicholas, let's talk a little bit more about you. So how did this passion for writing and creating your own stories come about? Who instilled that passion in you?
Really, it started as an actor. I studied theater in school, and I was acting, and there was a moment for me sitting on stage during a rehearsal where I was thinking about, I could play that role, and I think I'd be great. And I could play that role, and I think I'd be great. And I can even play her part, and I might not have the right body for it, but I think I'd be great. But yeah, so the idea that like I wanted to embody all of those characters, regardless of the fact that I'm not the right casting for, the mother or, several other types of characters. That idea kind of led me down to the idea of starting to write plays, because then as a writer, I get to play all of those characters myself from the inside, from the ground up. I get to embody them, be them, give them life, give them words. So
Absolutely.
that was kind of the like, huh.
Nice. Now, would you consider, going back to your bio as well, that 2007 was your aha moment, the realization where you made a decision to create your career, to create your brand in the publishing world? Was that your aha moment?
That was definitely a turning point. Yeah. At that point, I was still like looking and doing work as an actor as well.
Mm.
And that was kind of the point where it shifted more as a writer, where I started to see that I could successfully create these worlds and create these characters and do this. So that was definitely like, that was a crossroads for sure.
Definitely, definitely. Now let's actually talk about the creation of your incredible works. So when you began writing your very first story with your team, what were some of the goals you had going into this first project as the creator and the author, but also the promises you were making to your future readers?
Do you mean all the way back with Pray for Death?
Yes, Pray for Death, the very first one.
Oh man, there, whatever promises I made by accident at that point. that was a period of a lot of like throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. And actually, like ironically, I had me and Daniele Serra, the artist on that book, he and I had a promise from a publisher to publish another story that we're working on. And they were like, yeah, hold on, we're getting the contracts together. Hold on, we're just getting the contracts together. And we were just like, and the opportunity for Zuda came up, and I was like, hey, do you want to get in on this too? And then that went, the other guys disappeared. So it was sort of a like, that was an opportunity and we took it and it worked out. When, if it was like putting all my promises in that other place and all my, thoughts and feelings and plans for the next thing. I mean, Pray for Death, it was a 60-page comic with the contract, and I only barely had 8 figured out when we put it together.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a huge learning experience and a lot of like, learning on the fly, figuring out what works, what doesn't, what to do next, how to carry the story through. I had all of this, backstory and plot and all this, and then like, where do I fit that in now?
Absolutely. Now, jumping ahead to Monster Elementary and The Kid and the Ripper, obviously those are two very different stories with two very different audiences in mind. But when you went into those two projects, did your goals kind of remain the same, in the sense that you're still going to create an incredible comic for people to enjoy, and for fans who have been with you since, your first comic back in 2007, they're going to see like, oh, wow, he branched out into new territory?
Yeah, actually, that was a big deal for me with doing all ages, was that I felt like all ages comics were kind of stupid. You know what I mean? There, a lot of the all ages comics at the time, they're a lot better now, but at the time it was a lot of just like watered down versions of Batman, and they felt like they were kind of insulting to kids, like talking down to them. And so that was definitely one of my goals, was to make an all ages comic that was, smart and funny, and, tells kids that they can move up a level instead of treating them like they belong down a level.
Absolutely. 100%.
I didn't like one of the things, I didn't really like censor, I didn't censor out big words. You know what I mean? As a kid, when I read something and I saw a word I didn't know, it was a learning moment. I found out what that word meant and I continued on. And so I wanted to make an all ages comic that was just not stupid, that was good, that I wanted to put the same kind of quality into all ages storytelling as everyone seemed to be putting into graphic mature storytelling.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Now, from Pray for Death to Monster Elementary and The Kid and the Ripper, what has been the feedback like from that first comic to now? And has it remained the same, or has it changed over the years?
You know what? Pray for Death it opened doors for me, and it got my foot in. But it didn't really set a personality for me. It didn't create a tone. And coming out of it, I kind of felt like I needed a palate cleanse, because it was, writing that was getting into the mind of a serial killer and, thinking about horrible ways to kill people. And it actually kind of felt heavy afterwards when I was done. And that's why Monster Elementary came along, because it was the palate cleanser. It got to be fun and upbeat and happy and weird and strange. And there were no rules. I could do whatever I wanted.
Absolutely.
And then that kind of became what I was known for. So I was doing, I did 2 volumes of Monster Elementary. I did 3 children's books for Fat Rabbit Farm. And then it was after coming out of that it was like, I kind of miss killing people. and The Kid and the Ripper, like, from the moment I started writing comics, I wanted to tell a story with Jack the Ripper. That was something that was, inside me. My entire life I've been fascinated with Jack the Ripper and with Billy the Kid. So it was kind of something that had to happen for me. So I did very much want to go hard in the other direction, do something very different. And it gave me kind of a way to split the table when I'm at conventions. Like, half of it's all ages and half of it's mature readers. And I think that's really fun and really cool. And, families come to the table and everybody can get something.
Nice. That's incredible. Yeah. That's incredible, Nicholas. Now, from that moment, from 2007 to now, would you feel that your goals have been, I don't want to say validated, but they've stayed true to your integrity as a writer and a creator?
Yeah. I mean, I've been fortunate enough that pretty much everything I've worked on was mine. I have stories and anthologies all over the place and other kinds of things, but every time it's mine, and I'm putting it in there. I'm contributing my voice, my ideas. I'm also kind of an easygoing collaborator. So when I collaborate with people, it's like, what do you got? Here's what I got. And I know that, some friends of mine that are other writers, they tend to be heavily descriptive in their scripts, breaking down the panel and, this is here and this is here. And he's holding up 3 fingers and his other hand is a fist. And I don't write that way. I write, I work with artists that I know and I trust, and that their work is amazing. So it's kind of easy, Sometimes my panel descriptions are as simple as "they continue."
That's very, very true. And that topic of, collaboration, trusting your team is something that we're touching on in the business side of being a writer and being a creator. But before we get to that, there is a question. Well, 2 questions I wanted to get your thoughts on, Nicholas. So the first is a reflective question, which is, as you mentioned before, The Kid and the Ripper is your baby, that this is something that you want to work on for a very, very long time. And I think that's true for all writers and all authors. Like, there is that one story that, we are really passionate about, that we want to get to. And then when we do create it, we are a little hesitant of whether or not to share it with others, because we don't know what the reaction is going to be like. And in today's digital age, it's a double-edged sword. On one end, you're going to have people who are open-minded, who are interested, and that's just the readers. You also have fellow writers, fellow authors who are also going to be intrigued by this. But on the other side of the coin, unfortunately, we do leave ourselves exposed to hate speech, trolls, spam, a lot of negativity, and so forth, especially for graphic novels. I've seen a lot of that in the interwebs when it comes to graphic novels and depictions inside, even though it's already made clear what the book is going to be about in the little descriptions. But I digress. And ultimately, that can weigh heavily on a writer's mental health and their overall confidence in themselves. And ultimately, imposter syndrome, which is always in the back of everyone's mind. I don't care what a person says, it's always going to be there no matter what. And it's going to come with a vengeance when you least expect it. So, Nicholas, throughout your career, have you ever had those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has continued to discipline you to not only write the stories that you've wanted to write, but also to take the chance and branch out into other avenues? You know, with Monster Elementary and Kid the Ripper, two very different stories, two very different audiences. And sometimes, as creators, people like to pigeonhole us into one style of writing when we shouldn't.
Yeah, that's and it's interesting to me how I sort of became the all ages guy for a while when, you know, I broke in with a serial killer story. And that's kind of something that I'm always looking in different genres to work in. Like I have an all ages sci-fi comic called Daisy Cassidy. And I'm actually first drafted on a graphic novel that's a mature reader sci-fi story. And then, you know, the comic I did for the Nobodies anthology was kind of a crime story. So I like to try different, you know, different genres, different ways of approaching the storytelling. Because I think that's important. I think that's, you know, we all have a few different people inside of us, and we got to let them all speak, I think.
That's 100% true, Nicholas. Absolutely. Yeah. And this now goes into more of an opinion question, but I think it is still very valid to talk about. And some context for this question, a previous guest I had on my show, Jasmine Young, made a post not too long ago saying that we are now in a digital age of independent creators. And when I first looked at that and she gave her reasoning, I was like, okay, that does make sense, because her argument was that the lockdown years, the COVID years, really allowed, or rather push people to explore other avenues about themselves in an age of isolation during those 4 years. And for me, I began my career as an author in 2020. And from there, I've been able to publish 4 books within the last 5 years, which is incredible. But upon, you know, further reflection and asking this question to a lot of my guests, I've been getting a lot of conflicting answers. Some say that we are in a golden age. Some say that we are not in a golden age, but in a renaissance of some kind, which I really like. Some say we're in a new age. Some say that we're just entering the renaissance or new age. And some have even gone further to say we are not in a new age, renaissance, or golden age whatsoever, because while there is an influx of new material, a majority of those, or maybe half of those, were not created on the basis of passion. They were simply created just to be out there. So for Nicholas, in your career, looking back, the last 4 years, like during the quarantine pandemic years, do you feel that we are in sort of a new age of independent creators or a renaissance of independent creators?
You know, I don't know if either is really the best description, but I think that it's definitely a new era. We are going through changes, and we are growing, and things are getting different. I know that for myself and from my perspective, it seemed like when the lockdown started, people were doing more reading. You know, we were staying in. I was ordering books. I was reading them. I was doing a lot more reading than I did before, because the way we spend our time changed. And I think, you know, coming out of that, habits have changed. So people are still reading a little bit more, but then also we're allowed out in the sunshine again. And I think it's starting to dip back again. But, you know, for me creatively, that was actually what got Kid and the Ripper made, because I finally had the time to refocus and reframe my life and look at what I wanted to do for that book, what I needed to do for that book, and find the right people to make the book that I wanted to make. Because like I said, I wasn't going to make that book unless it was the way I wanted it. And, you know, the pandemic made that a possibility for me.
Absolutely. And that segues perfectly now into the business segment of being a writer, being an author, which I am very excited to hear your thoughts on for the next set of questions, Nicholas. So, as an icebreaker, whenever you work on a new project of yours and you're assembling your team, that idea of collaboration, because of course, you know, you have your idea of what the character should be and the story, and of course the artist has their own style and how they approach their stories through their artwork. So as a writer building this team, how do you sort of balance the two, where you want to showcase everyone's skills to the fullest while also staying true to the core of the story, in the case of The Kid and the Ripper?
So the Kid and the Ripper, I hired everyone on. That was all. Everyone else that worked on that was work for hire, because that was my baby and that was my book, and you know, I wanted to make sure it happened and it came about the way that I wanted it to. And I don't always feel that way with most projects, because most of the time, you know, actually, if I have a comic called Misfit Island right now that's funding on Kickstarter, and I worked with, I co-created it with Sarah Silver and with Bobby Timoney, and they're people that I trust implicitly and that I know that we are aligned with creatively. And so it's really easy to have give and take and to, you know, create a world that is all of ours. And that's, you know, that's usually a lot more rewarding, I think. Well, they're both rewarding in different ways. You know,
Absolutely.
Monster Elementary, that was all work for hire. But originally it was going to be co-created with Kanan Grawl. And he wound up having to dump out on that. And so I found myself in a position where I was hiring a bunch of different artists all to do different stories. So it sort of became create our own, or work for hire for them out of necessity.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, whenever you've worked on a new project, you know, the audience is always going to be in the back of every writer's mind. Like, okay, I have this idea for the story. I kind of know who the audience is. And sometimes, you know, during the writing process, it's going to change. Same thing with graphic novels. Of course, when the artist is hired on with other writers to help flesh out the story, that's where you can see, like, okay, the artwork's kind of leaning to more, you know, a middle ground between, you know, young adults and adults. The dialogue is easy to follow. It's not too complex with the story. And all that plays into the factor of understanding one's audience, because when we are the writers, we know the audience because it's us. But when we share it with others, that's when we really have to take a hard look and figure out who exactly is it. So, Nicholas, in your opinion, when should a creator really have like a definite idea of their audience? During the writing phase of the project or the marketing phase? And add on to that, for all the numerous projects that you've been a part of, did you have an idea of the audience in mind already, or did that come later?
I mean, I think it's important to know what you're creating from the beginning. When you put pencil to paper, you should know what you're doing. And that doesn't necessarily mean know who your audience is or how you're marketing it. But I mean, if you're sitting down to write a comic and you're using all kinds of mature themes and graphic language and nudity, and then think to yourself, oh, this should be all ages, you've gone in the wrong direction from the start.
Yes.
For me, I learned a lot just by making Monster Elementary, because I never really thought about the levels. Like when kids are coming to look for books, for the parents really, they want to know what age range this is meant for. And I just, I wrote all ages. I was like, no, it's for little kids and for adults too. It's fun. Anybody that likes to have fun, read this book. But parents are like, no, my kids are 9. This is for 9-year-olds. So there definitely is a point where you got to start thinking about that. The other thing too is that I learned that I could not pigeonhole my audience with that book,
Right.
because there'd be all kinds of adults, coming by. They're like, oh my God, this is so cute. I want this. There'd be, big dudes with, septum piercings and tattoos, and they'd stop and think, this is perfect for my nephew. You couldn't ever pigeonhole anyone. You couldn't figure anything out. I used to sit back and try. And I reached a point where I just thought, you know what? Everybody deserves the really cool stuff that I make. So let's just pitch it to everybody.
That's very true. That is very true. And I've had another guest, well, 2 guests on the show very recently who have made the point saying that, in their opinion, authors and writers shouldn't market to an audience, but rather write to the readership. And for their story in particular, their story was a mix of Red Dawn with elves with the Lord of the Rings style theme. I was like, I can easily tell you off the top of my head, there are 5 people in my own inner circle who would absolutely kill for that. And that, of course, boils down to, the readership, those individual people, because you're absolutely right, Nicholas. We shouldn't pigeonhole ourselves into one style of writing, nor should we pigeonhole our works to a particular audience or a readership. However, it is important to understand the readership to figure out what story belongs in each category, because you have middle grade, YA, NA, and AF with their own set of rules and expectations for not just the writers who write in those age groups, but also for the readers to understand. Because some books, as you may mention earlier, can teeter between, maturity, but also still technically be YA, which I don't know how that's possible. That's another discussion in of itself.
So I get myself into trouble because when I think about what's appropriate for all ages, I think about what was appropriate for all ages in the 80s.
Right.
We're living in a very different world from that now.
Yes, absolutely. So ultimately, actually, let's talk about Monster Elementary in this perfect example. So when you began writing that, of course, you said that it is for all ages, but I am curious, during the writing process, did you consider possibly making it YA? Or did you always know that this story is suitable for all ages?
When I started Monster Elementary, I didn't even think about those levels. I didn't know about those levels. I just wanted to make it all ages. You know what I mean? I wanted to make something that was fun and unique and good for kids and fun for adults as well, if they have that kind of sense of humor. So I definitely did not think about the simpler categories, the more defined. Monster Elementary, it was a real learning curve, because then there'd be like librarians and teachers and parents that would start poking, well, it's not okay for all ages because of this or this. There's actually, in that first book, there is a gun that gets fired at the ground. There's a bullet shot at the ground. And for me, that was like, I didn't blow anyone's head off. But for, all of the rules and the guidelines and everything, that's a thing. That becomes a thing.
That's very, very true. And, that comes down to, of course, the author's individuality of how they approach storytelling, while also understanding, the genre of writing that they want to be in, whether it's fantasy, action, adventure, dark thriller, noir, whatever. It's that fine balance. And it also is a balancing act when you have a team, when you network with people who have the same vision as you. So this is a two-part question again, Nicholas. So the first part, whenever you work on a project, how do you balance your individuality as the writer and creator while also understanding the genre and the audience tied with it whenever you work on a project? And then also, whenever you are networking for a new project, getting a new set of possible writers to look over it, or maybe some artists to help with some illustration, how do you also balance that too? Because there's a lot of different perspectives on a team, but ultimately when working together on a project, the visions all have to be the same, but still showcasing, as we talked about earlier, everyone's individuality.
Yeah, no, I guess it's pretty easy for me because, well, first of all, I think whatever genre you're working in, you should love that genre. You should know that genre. You should love that genre. It shouldn't be a concern for you to be able to tell a story within that genre. Because if you think Westerns are stupid and then you're like, well, I'm going to do one, that's not going to work out.
No.
It's going to feel disingenuous. It's going to probably feel kind of like an insult to fans of Westerns. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if you don't love the genre, then don't work in it. And if you love it, then I think your individuality is going to build on the genre and add to the story. You know, I know that sort of my sense of humor comes up in everything I do. You know, Billy the Kid has kind of a similar sense of humor to the characters in Monster Elementary. His is just a little bit more mature.
Yes, that is very, very true.
So I think that it's definitely okay for a writer's voice to come through in everything. And it should, because otherwise, why are we the ones writing it?
Again, very, very true. And then also, I think I talk about also from networking. Networking is essential for writers and creators because now more than ever, almost everybody has a team. Even like for authors who are independent, they have their own set of editors, their own cover artists, and they have their own team of beta and art readers. So, Nicholas, in your opinion, how important is it to network in today's climate, especially? And as a fun little add-on, are there any people you want to give a personal shout out to who have helped you throughout your journey?
You know, the big shout out that I always give is Jimmy Palmiotti, who, if you know comics, you know Jimmy Palmiotti, and when I first was doing Monster Elementary, he was kind enough to get on a personal call with me and give me all kinds of advice about how to deal with Kickstarter and how to do the book on my own. So mad props to Jimmy Palmiotti right off the bat. And other than that, you know, it's the collaborators I've worked with. And you know, a network is very important. My first network was Zuda Comics. It was, you know, all of the guys working at Zuda, we had kind of a small community, an online community. We hung out at conventions. And then when it came time to make Monster Elementary, a handful of those guys worked with me. You know, Kanan Grawl, who did Celador for Zuda, and Bobby Timoney, who's worked on almost every book I've done because he's amazing. He had the Night Owls at Zuda. And of course, Daniele Serra as well, who did Pray for Death with me. And then, you know, other people that I met around at conventions, like Cal Moray on Monster Elementary. I met her through a friend. Leroy Leahy, I met him through a networking event. So, and then Pat Moss worked on a second Monster Elementary book. He was a friend of Bobby Timoney's. And Jimena Sanchez was a friend of a friend. And I met her through a convention through friends. So it's really, I mean, being a part of the community is really important and very key. And then, you know, the more projects I work on, the people that do really good work and that do really reliable work, they're the ones I keep coming back to.
Awesome. That is amazing, Nicholas. And this ultimately ties down to the final question of this amazing interview, and it's a big one. So I'll give some context for this question. So I've been doing this show now for about 6-7 years. 3 years on YouTube, and within those 6 years, I've interviewed authors from traditional, hybrid, self-published, and then diving deeper to aspiring, debuting, returning. And then I've also branched out into interviewing editors, comic artists, comic writers, heads of independent press houses, CEOs of their own comic incorporations, and so forth. And I've learned a lot from these incredible people. And the two things I realized that as creators, there's two paths: to be a writer and to be known as a writer. One is dedicated to the craft, the other is dedicated to marketing. Each has their own set of expectations, but they lead to the same goal, which is world-renowned success. But what's important to note in the comics industry as well as the publishing industry, this is not a get-rich-quick money scheme. There is no guarantee that your first work is going to be the start of your legacy. And that could be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. Are there exceptions to the rules? Absolutely. But they are exceptions, because generally speaking, your first book or your first comic or your first series is not going to be the start of your legacy, especially if your goals are unrealistic and unattainable. They have to be realistic in the sense that you can build a career over time. So ultimately, Nicholas, here's the final question. With everything you've learned thus far, from your own obstacles and hurdles that you've encountered in your career, how would you help a fellow writer understand this idea that, well, yes, there is no guarantee it's going to be a success, but that shouldn't stop you from perfecting and honing your craft, whether you're a writer, an artist, or someone else in the industry?
Well, I think one thing that you hit right on the head is that nobody gets into comics for the money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we didn't. If you're getting into comics to get rich, then you are in the wrong industry. Because we've all heard of Todd McFarlane and Robert Kirkman, but they're not everybody. They're not how this. We get into comics because we love comics.
Yes.
We love making comics. If you don't love making comics, then you shouldn't be making comics. And then, I mean, from there on, I think if you love doing this and you love making these and you genuinely enjoy it, then continuing to improve and get better, and that's just an everyday thing. That's part of it. I actually just the other day I was talking to my friend Bobby Timoney again. We're finishing up the art on our new book Misfit Island, and I was pumping him up. I was like, look, you just got to finish the cover, and it's got to be the best cover you've ever drawn. And he surprised me. His answer was, of course, because his philosophy is everything that we make should be the best thing we've ever made, because we keep moving forward, we keep getting better, and we keep working on our craft.
Absolutely, 100%, which I think at the end of the day is very true. If you are passionate about something, you're going to do fine. If you're not passionate about it, or you're going into an industry for the wrong reasons, you're not going to be passionate about it, and it's going to show. And also, to add on to that, finding a good group of people who have that same mindset is also very key, because nowadays everybody has some form of team in their corner, which is very, very important to have. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on the show. I want to give a huge thank you to our guest, Nicholas Doan, for making his official debut here on the channel. Now, Nicholas, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? And do you have any upcoming projects you would like to announce for people to support or purchase?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm Broken Oar Comics, OAR, like a paddle, Broken Oar Comics. And Misfit Island is on Kickstarter right now until May 29th. And it's another all-ages comic. Tons of fun, illustrated by Bobby Timoney, co-written with Sarah Silver. And they can find that on Kickstarter. And the real easy way is to punch in misfitislandcomic.com. It'll take you right there.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video, as well as tag where people can buy a copy of The Kid and the Ripper, because again,
BrokenLoreComics.com.
This is a great comic. It's perfect. It's really, really good. If you love intense stories like these, you will not be disappointed. And be on the lookout for my official review on that coming soon. Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you again so much for joining us for another interview here. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, we'll see you in the next video.